and we're going to work this out faster than expected, as you know, as you naysayers always say, we will not. And when we get to Mars, we're going to be able to start like countries. There's going to be entrepreneurialism. There's going to be there's a lot of bureaucracy on Earth. A lot of people like you saying that we should like not do all this awesome stuff, and we're going to do it. And you're going to be left in the dustbin of history.
Today's guest is New York Times bestselling author Zach Weinersmith, the brilliant mind behind the acclaimed webcomic Saturday Morning Breakfast Cereal and award-winning books A City on Mars and Beowulf. Zach shares his insights on thriving as an artist in a constantly shifting social media landscape and explains the nuances of how he monetizes his work through the power of his fan base. We also delve into the making of A City on Mars, a deeply researched and laugh-out-loud funny exploration of the challenges and misconceptions surrounding space colonization, from the technical hurdles to the profound human risks. Zach opens up about balancing humor with intellectual depth, collaborating with his frequent co-author and wife, Kelly, and his take on whether children are shaped more by nature or nurture. Let's start the show. Zach, I'm so excited to talk to you. Thanks for being on.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome. So I want to dive into sort of the meatier questions. Before I do, though, to frame this for everybody, I don't have enough time in our allotted block here to list all your accolades, but I believe a recent winner of the Royal Society of Trivedi Science Book Prize, Hugo Award, nominated for Outstanding Short Form Comic, Single Panel Comic. Goes on your nonfiction, which we'll talk about, your most recent being A City on Mars, but I've also written Soonish, Open Borders. I should note City on Mars is with your wife, Kelly.
Yes.
And some fiction, including a graphic novel for Bea Wolf, Augie and the Green Knight, Augie and the Green Knight. I've got some comments on Trial of the Clone. List goes on and on. You're an extraordinarily accomplished man, and I want to dive in because you are at the intersection of art and science, and art and commerce, and you incorporate, I think is it fair to say, esoteric subject matter?
Extremely, hopefully.
I want to ask how you're responding to some of the changes in social media relative to the algorithms and, monetizing the relationship you have with your audience.
Yeah, let's do that. So let me give you a little story. I was just recently at a wedding, and it just happened that one of the people getting married was friends with a bunch of cartoonists, kind of a pillar of the community, and there was a cartoonist table. At the, how when you get married, you try to seat the people who won't fight with each other. And so all the cartoonists got sat together, and everybody was talking about the same thing, which is like the sort of catastrophe that's happening in slow motion that accelerated with COVID, which is that if you go back, clearly if you go back 20 years, everybody goes to websites, right? You have a list of websites, you go to them. And one of the consequences of that is if you were selling something or being an entertainer or whatever it was, is that if you sold ads, most of the revenue went to you. If you wanted to sell merchandise, people who went to your website would actually see this thing where you said, buy my t-shirt, please. And now that's all gone. And if you talk to someone even under the age of like 30, mostly they go to about 5 websites. Those websites are, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and maybe Reddit and a couple and YouTube and like 1 or 2 others. And the idea of even like websites in the traditional sense is just sort of going away. Like, one of the astonishing things, I still think about this, I used to be able to, like, maybe 15 years ago, if you were a cartoonist, you would post a little thing below your blog saying, hey guys, go look at this thing. And most people would go to it. Now it's basically zero. And the sort of ultimate goal of all social media is to denude all content of the source of its creation and anything else you might like to tag on to it. So that's the cynical view. The flip of that is just, I think it's true for everyone. It's probably especially true for entertainers, is you never get to pick where people are watching, right? You just get to do stuff. There's a cartoonist named Jim Benton who said it well. He said something like, if you were a juggler on the street and then a mall opens up and no one's coming to your street, you don't get to insist that they ought to come back where you were juggling. And so, you can spend a minute swearing and spitting, but then you have to decide what you're going to do. And so what's happening now is everyone's trying to figure out where they can make peace with the new system. but it is genuinely tough. And so what you're seeing in my world is a lot of people are just either leaving the business or just accepting that they're going to make less money, or trying to find some categories of premium services they can offer that they didn't used to do, or as a friend of mine put it, playing by influencer rules, which means actually really focusing on this sort of weird parasociality paradigm that has been really built out on like Instagram and other places. As for myself, my approach has been, I've been diversifying into like working with traditional publishing, where at least you have a kind of powerhouse behind you, and there's just like an audience of maybe more patient people than your average TikTok user. But even that's tough because, and this is the last, I'm not rambling here, but that's tough because you used to be able to, like, even on Facebook, like 5 years ago, you used to be able to say, guys, I have a book out. You have agreed to follow me. You probably would like to know about the book. At Facebook would actually transmit that information. Now it will not, unless you pay literally thousands of dollars, which makes it, a wash financially. So it's a tough time.
So let's backtrack for a little bit.
Yeah.
For your SMBC Saturday morning breakfast cereal. I remember being in college. So for the audience's benefit, Zach is the younger brother of a friend of mine that I went to high school with. So Zach and I went to high school, but he's a little bit behind me. But I remember being in college, and this was huge. It got circulated among my friend group, and I was a follower of it. And it was sort of incidental that I found out that you were the author. So what happens to that following? I know it was a large following for many, many years. I think that started in 2005. Is that
so something like that? It's sort of fuzzy, but yeah, something around there.
And so I know that there's I know you had probably an email list and a lot of very loyal followers. I mean, just to sort of go back to the esoteric quality of, maybe for the audience, you can share a little bit what the comic is about, and then talk to us about what the relationship with the audience was then and how it's transformed.
Yeah, sure. So, oh gosh, how to describe it? So like this is, I was kind of in on the ground floor on people posting comics on the internet back when it was like a weird thing for losers. And I don't know if I got lucky or what, but mine sort of broke out. And so I did a lot of maybe stuff that was differentiating, a lot of like science or philosophy, humor, math, but also just like stupid jokes. It was kind of a blend. I think that's probably why it did well with college students.
It was probably as highbrow as it was lowbrow.
That's how. Yeah, that's a good way to say it. It tried to do everything. I'm a fan of people who do both. Voltaire was very good at telling a dirty joke and doing deep philosophy. So it's a good goal to have. And also, I think, and to this day, this is true. Whatever you're doing, it's good to be differentiated, because I think that gives you more staying power. So I always, one thing that happens in comics, and this probably applies in different areas, is now and then you'll see someone and they're doing comics, and then one day they do that comic about how like cats are funny or anxiety is very difficult, and they get like a bump, and then 6 months later, that's all they're doing. And it's like you could see the disaster coming, because they're now doing stuff anyone could do, and eventually their audience will discard them. Someone else is doing it. So it's good to have a kind of like, to be the only person doing something means people have to come to you. And yes, I had a really nice following. I still do. And that led to, there was a really nice part of my career where, on the old internet, you could get a following, but it could never be that big because there just weren't that many people on the internet. It wasn't like ubiquitous and normal like it is now. But one of the downsides also was you couldn't make a lot of money. There weren't a lot of people, if they were making a living, they were like handbagging their own T-shirts and mailing them and stuff. And now there's just great third-party services for everything. And so you never touch your own stuff, that kind of thing. The downside is there's enormous competition, but also the stuff I mentioned earlier about how it's become harder to reach your audience in a social media era. But so there's this kind of really nice in-between period where kind of do both. You could really reach people. Ad revenue was still high. The bottom hadn't fallen out of that business. There was a monopoly by Google and Facebook, or a duopoly. So it was a pretty good time. But I one of the weird things is I have a lot more like sort of ways to gauge audience size now, so to speak. Like I can look up numbers that are fairly detailed on like Instagram or Facebook. But I actually feel like I have less of a grip on audience size, or less of a grip on what's meaningful. So like, if you have a website and 1 million people come to it a day, that means you have 1 million very loyal people who are actually taking a positive action to go see you. So I could say like now, certainly more people see my comics per day than ever. But part of that passive consumption on like Instagram or like just the variety of infinite scroll feeds. And so, ultimately, I mean, people have to reviews, I suppose, but ultimately what your goal is to make a decent living so you can keep doing the fun stuff. And so it's like as if you suddenly have more people, but they are less engaged directly with you. And so that feels to me like a big part of the conundrum that needs to be cracked for people like me. And I still don't know what the answer is.
Do you feel like the algorithms having changed since COVID have influenced how people are viewing that?
Oh, yes. I would say, like I said, I think it's been fairly disastrous for artists. And I say that in a nuanced way, which is like, some people are really good at social media. I think of like Nathan Pyle, who's also a great artist. I don't want to like say it's an either or. He does Strange Universe, the one with the like aliens who talk about life. They're extremely popular, but he's also very good at sort of like making viral content that produces sales, which is something I am bad at. And well, what's tough is I think for any career, you get into a career because there are things that appeal to you about it. Maybe that's the lifestyle you get to live. Maybe that's that you get to leave some kind of legacy, whatever it is. And a lot of us got into the arts because we wanted to sit around making stuff all day. And so part of the problem is if you talk to someone who's like 22 now and you ask, what do you do for business? They will say, well, I'm on the following 12 platforms and I manage them. And so like, whatever you could say about the old internet, that it was kind of like sparse and the art was certainly not as good. Most of you just like figured out how to do an HTML website and put stuff on. Now it's like a full-time job learning how to like manage algorithms. And like separate from the fact that it just kind of sucks that you like, you can make yourself really depressed by imagining your favorite author from like the early 20th century. And now like Hemingway has to like have a parasocial relationship where he says, look at my bedhead and my dog and isn't coffee tasty? It's like, sure. But also, you try to imagine the absolute black hole of time that should have been spent just perfecting craft that is now going into, Instagram likes it a little better when I use 6 hashtags than 5. So to me, it's sort of like aesthetically disastrous. But so I think we talked in email a little bit. I was saying like, it seems like the counter move a lot of people are making now is going for like Substack, other sorts of direct newsletters, Patreon, like basically completely disintermediated kind of ancient technology. Because I think there's an extent to which it's become bad for the consumer too. Like you pull up Instagram and you don't get what you signed up for. You get 1 or 2 things you signed up for, and then you get infinite scroll. That's designed to keep you engaged, which is, I think, like you do it, but you don't sort of feel gratified in the way you do if you get things that appeal to you personally.
Well, I wonder if that's a generational thing too, because I still have very much a website person.
Yes.
I'll go straight to the website. I have direct relationships with the people that I follow by way of exactly what you referenced, Substack. I've started to explore that a little bit, and I in a lot of ways, I feel like a Luddite, just an old man trying to learn new tricks, and it's the world has passed me by. But I'm curious, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it, does it make a sound? You as an artist, you had to get it out there, and I looked at SMBC when it was first coming out, and I thought, oh, that's a great passion project, but I had no idea. And while it's surprising to hear you speak about this, it's not necessarily unexpected, because the detail orientedness that you possess in everything you do, especially in that most recent work, A City on Mars, that I read, no stone is left unturned. How did you know how to monetize that? How did you start to explore that? Because you were always a doodler, right? I mean,
yes. Yeah. I never paid attention.
Is a new science.
Yeah, totally. So it's changed over time. I mean, one of the things about being, I think it's probably true for any career, but especially in entertainment, you really have to be willing to change everything every couple of years. There's always some disruption happening. And I'm like, ideally, well, sort of holding on to values and the career you've got in business. But so, I mean, I started, it was like MySpace, right? You had to have a MySpace. And then what's tough is MySpace was obliterated. And there's actually been a very similar thing recently with Twitter, where like a lot of people were able to, X now, where like a lot of people were able to use X.
Elon just blocked you.
Yeah, so I blocked him. I had enough Elon. So I got there first. But no, but like I was talking to people who used to be able to like, look, if I wanted a few more Patreon followers, I do like a Twitter thread about obscure history and I pick up 4 people and they change the algorithm. So you have to pay money to get ranking. And now it's not worth it, I think. And so, but it's like, usually if you're outside this business, it's hard to imagine how devastating that is because you spend years developing a presence and then a new guy takes over and you just lose. And MySpace was like that too, long ago. And that sort of thing happens perpetually. Facebook was very similar. It was like, at the very beginning, it was super good. You had access to all these people. You could say, go check out my stuff. And then they turned the screws and it was like, oh, now I have to pay you to get the thing that I thought I was, doing. I was going to get for free forever. But early on, I made a conscious decision, which was I did not, this is bad for your audience, but I did not want to run a business.
Yeah.
Because it's like you face a kind of fork in the road if you're someone like me, which is, well, as like you're making more money, you can say, oh, I'm going to hire someone. And then I will produce like more merchandise, and my money will go up. And then I'll need to hire a second person. And I know people like this. And I remember talking to a friend of mine who said, well, the good thing, I get to run a business now when we get to like make animations, which I could have never done on my own, but 90% of my time now is spent doing that. And 10% is spent doing the stuff I got into this for. And he was sort of ambivalent about it. But I think there's a sort of spectrum. Like I like running the business in that I think there's a kind of happy medium because like money is time, right? So like, I make enough to this day off my work that I don't have to do stuff I don't enjoy, like taking commissions for art, which is a big part of a lot of people's business. And I can like I do have someone I've hired to assist me for like running Kickstarters and social media and stuff I don't like doing. And so it is a little bit complicated. But my goal then became just make the best stuff to get the most audience. And if you're leaving a bunch of money on the table, that's okay because the whole point is the lifestyle. And having a good enough income that I can like have a family and a house.
Sure.
Yeah.
So we can keep going into social media into a wormhole because I think there's a lot to unpack there. But I want to understand a little bit more about your writing process because and drawing process. So how do you turn that from a passion to a product?
Yeah. So it's probably depressing. People have this idea when they're not professionals at arts that it's kind of pure joy all the time, and it's just not. Nor should it be. There should be a level of sort of self-loathing, because you need to be sufficiently critical of yourself and sufficiently driven. And it's a pyramid-shaped business. Only a few of us get to make a living at it. So you're really fighting tooth and nail to get to that point. And what I ended up doing, I actually have like a life schedule every single day. So I have a kind of, I experimented for a very long time with different ways to schedule out how my days would go. At one point,
I love this. This was a question of mine, by the way. I really want to get into this.
Totally.
What is your day?
So let me tell you how I got to it because it was a sort of development. So when I was like a single guy, I actually kept a sort of Ben Franklin style. This is what you're doing from 7 to 9. This is what you're doing from 9 to 10. And which is a great way to schedule. The only downside to keeping a schedule like that is if you get off because of something, if you're off schedule, then like your whole day is messed up and you have to start like reorienting. And so I experimented with different systems that I don't know if you have a family, but it gets much harder once you have kids. And
I do.
Yeah. So you're like, oh, I know I take from 9 to 10. And then, oh no, your kid's sick. And oh no, you have to, you forgot about this field trip and now you have to, so just forget about it. You're going to be a stress case all the time. So what I do is, I have a giant Excel sheet. I actually tried using the various productivity apps and to me, it's like they all introduce extra work to an already busy existence.
Absolutely.
So these ones, they're like these gamified ones where you like, you did your exercise, so you get the sword of destiny. And I was like, this is nicely addicting, but it's like, now I'm like competing for points instead of just doing my work. And so no, I keep an Excel sheet and the Excel sheet has almost everything I do from you need to read this much of this type of thing to, you need to finish this much drawing to like brush your stupid teeth and get some exercise and I don't have stuff like spend time with your family. Presumably I'm doing that willingly, but it's really down to like anything that you would not do if you weren't forced to by the piece of paper is on the list. And the way I set it up is it's sort of like you have your choice of doing any of the tasks on the list any time, but there's some that like carry over to the next day and some don't. So as an example, like obviously you can't like skip brushing your teeth for 7 days and then brush your teeth 7 times. That's not going to work. But there's a lot of tasks in life like that where it's better if you do a little each day. So for me, like writing, I can't like, so if you write for a living, everybody knows this. There's like a brief period where you're good at it. So like some people write in the morning, some people write at night, but nobody writes well for more than like 3 or 4 hours a day. And so you can't say, well, I'll skip today and do tomorrow. So there's some things that like do not roll over on my schedule. There's other stuff like, for me, illustrations are not quite like that. If I need to do a lot of illustrations, I can work ahead or get behind it and come back through. So I sort of designate categories where you're allowed to get ahead. There's other stuff like exercise, you can't do that. And so I have this very, very strict schedule. And it also includes like self-cultivation stuff, right? So I think this is, again, probably true for most professions, but especially true in the arts, is like you need to be doing like a lot of reading or a lot of like whatever it is that makes you better at what you're doing. Like what I usually say to young artists who are like, how do I get a job in this, is you need to be more interesting than other people, because otherwise, why is your audience here? And so for me, that involves just a lot of like reading obscure stuff and exchanging letters with like scholars I'm interested in, that's like, under the hood dorky stuff. But it could be like climbing mountains or like, I don't know, wrestling bears. I don't know, but something, And so that's written into the schedule too. And actually, it's most of what I do is spend a lot of time self-cultivating to make myself like someone who you might want to hear about.
So I'm assuming there's certain things that are just must-haves. Like you alluded to writing, right? So
Yes.
what's that? Do you typically? I mean, I know you at this point in your career, you've got projects you're probably working on, right?
Yeah.
But prior to that, before you had projects, how did you find the subject matter that you thought had juice?
That is kind of like the quintessential skill, and it's very hard to develop. The right word for it is taste. And it's very hard to have taste about your own work. It's made the hardest thing, because it's like, it's very easy to feel what you want other people to feel. And I yell about this a lot. It's true outside the arts too. It's like, if you're giving a speech, you may feel very strongly about the subject, but you only transmit it to your listeners if you get the words right, sort of induce the same mental state that you had. And that the sort of irony and paradox of it is that requires craft. So in order to get that honest feeling over, you have to sort of be sneaky. You have to say like, okay, I need to, like you're giving a funeral speech and you want everybody to be crying. And it's no good to just say, I profoundly liked this person and they were very mean. You can't tip into cliches because then you lose. You have to come up with some way to get them to feel that strong feeling you're feeling. And so this is like the study of a lifetime. In terms of like writing, usually the good way to do that, I find, in addition to just having read a lot, so you have a kind of like a lot of colors in your palette, you also, it's very hard to sort of actively be creative. It's much better to come up with many ideas, and then the real talent is to kind of detect where the action is. So we used to do a show before COVID, which was like a science comedy show where we had amateur speakers we would teach to like do something like science sketch comedy. And I was always shocked by how people couldn't tell which of their ideas were the good ones. Like they would come up with brilliant ideas and like obviously unusable ones. They often couldn't tell the difference. And to me, the difference is seeing like, this idea is very rich in that it will permit you all sorts of additional ideas. And this other one may be funny, but it's not going to give you anything. And finding out how to do that with your own ideas, I think you can just only do it by practicing. And then the worst of it is having people tell you they don't like stuff. Listen to your audience.
Well, that's actually something I wanted to explore, because like I think about stand up or a band where you get immediate feedback, right?
Yep.
That's probably the closest connection between an artist and its audience. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we might put film and traditional books where you work on something for months. There's months of post production and editing. And then it finally comes out, and that might be 9 months or 12 months later. And then there's a press tour, and then you start to get sort of feedback from that experience. Your process was somewhere in the middle, right? Where you're putting it out, it's not instantaneous, but it is relatively immediate. That has to result in a lot of reps and a lot of information that you're gathering from what's working and what's not working, to the point where it's like the competence consciousness pyramid of, it becomes intuitive at some point, where
Yeah.
you've internalized that. I'm assuming. I guess that I'm framing that as a question.
Hopefully so. I've come to think a really valuable thing for an entertaining career is to have some point early on where you are doing a lot of rapid feedback work. So if you're a stand-up, that's great. Like literally, are they laughing or not? That's great. But like even like I understand like for the Beatles, they spent a lot of time doing like small crappy club shows for years, right? And so and like so I feel like I benefited. Like I started in short form, and I still do it. It's still a good like muscle exercise. But more and more of my career is already to run long form. And so like the City on Mars took 4 years. And then after that, it was like another year waiting for it to come out. You know, it was like a non-trivial portion of my entire career was about this book. But I feel like a lot of the sense of what's going to fly with a reader comes from that kind of like constant feedback. And then the really hard thing and the important thing is like, you have to accept feedback, but also not be destroyed by it. And also understand when it's bad feedback. Like not everything your audience
Right.
says is useful, right? Sometimes they're stupid and off base. By the way, that's true of compliments too, right?
Sure.
I was just helping some friends who'd written a pop sci book, and I was like, I think they really liked it because I was the first person that was like, I hate this chapter. But like, if you just send stuff to your friends, they'll be like, this is so good, and you're so great, and I love you, and it's gonna ruin you because you'll believe them, you know?
Yeah. Well, let's switch to the print. I think a lot of people see short form production, and whether that's in as writing or in art. I mean, writing is art, but in drawing, that you're just coming up with that. But I think there has to be some long form in it in order to distill it down into those words. So, one, is that true? And two, what's that process been like to transition to putting the longer form material out?
It's been enormously stressful, which is appropriate. I mean, I always say like if you're not like worried everyone's going to find out you're a fraud tomorrow, then you're not trying hard enough, Um, I really do think I try to convince my daughter of this when she's struggling with something. It's like struggle is proof that you are trying something. If you are never worried, never confused, never afraid, then you're obviously not attempting anything. So you talked about how like you get instant feedback on comics. With something like I said, A City on Mars was 4 years. It was a huge amount of time. We did get paid for it, so it's not like it would have. If nobody liked the book, at least we got paid. But it is this weird thing where you spend all this time. It's a 450-page book, and you just plunk it in front of people, and then you wait, right? And then there comes a week where once all these reviews start coming out, and it's extremely nerve-wracking. And I can't even read reviews. I don't even like reading good ones. I just avoid them. Kelly, my wife, reads them and tells me because she doesn't mind reading them, but I just like it's too much for me. And part of it is because it's like, look, if I put out a comic and it sucks and nobody likes it, or it's like confusing or bad, tomorrow I can sweep it behind the curtain and put something else out. If you don't like my book where I like poured my soul into it for years, that's hard. That's hard to accept. And it's so much worse, I assume, for people who do like memoir. Like imagine you write your whole life, and then you put it down and someone picks it up and it's like, whatever. So it's for me, it's a much more anxious line of work. I also, my other thing I do, you mentioned briefly, is I do fiction now with kids, and that's, at least with a pop science book, I can hide behind being right. Like you not like my right, at least I was right. Whereas in a kid's book, it's like purely, your kids are like the most honest people in the world. They either love or hate you. They don't care if you're like famous. They don't care if your mom likes you. They don't care if you like did you did something like literarily interesting. They pick it up and they put it down. And I'm actually as like literally right before we got on, I'm working on like the endless revisions of a kid's book I'm working on, and it's like I've never been so anxious about something.
Well, maybe I was wrong about stand-up or bands. It really is children, right? I mean, that is as instant as it gets.
Oh
Well,
my
I want to
God,
talk
they're
about the
brutal.
writing process, working with an editor, going through
Yeah.
that. But before we do, and it's going to be through the lens of City on Mars, but um, I'll butcher this, so you'll have
Yeah.
to correct me. But A City on Mars and is the exploration with humor and
Yeah.
an overwhelming amount of data and fact about the ramifications and challenges of inner space living,
Yes.
for lack of a better word. And I'm going to take a deep breath. For the audience, I want to just share the breadth of what you guys explore in this book. Uh, no pun, because I'm starting it off with that. But breathing, space sex and reproduction, rearing of children, rocketry, comparing moon to Mars and other locations, pros and cons of atmosphere, soil, lack thereof, gravity, sustenance, bathroom tendencies, including floating feces,
Yeah.
self-pleasure in space, currency exchange, space law, international diplomacy, lack of space to live in, complications with territory and cohabitation, SPOMs, which you're going to have to define for a number of us, and the extraordinary challenges in building encapsulated living quarters. And of course, last but not least, astronauts are liars. That is only a summary of my favorite takeaways in what I've read. I'm wondering if you might just break down what you think I missed, but I do want to explore the editing process, the research process, and maybe most interesting, working with your wife on yet another book.
So a SPOM is an actual word that was proposed, but so there's this long-standing dispute whether we should say space settlement or space colonies, because colony obviously has a kind of stink of it, of the area of colonialism, although settlement has the stink of settler colonialism. So people have tried to come up with better words. SPOM is short for space home. Nobody uses it. We found it in an old book. But yeah, spoke about space settlement. I would say
Isaac Asimov, right?
I believe that's right. I think it was Asimov. You're right. Yeah, so Asimov, very prolific, not always the best prose writer. Maybe that's controversial. Yes. So you got through a lot of what we do. I guess I would also add we do a lot on international law, although it's stuck after the SpaceX, so that you're already reading by the time you get to the intricacy of international governance, which we think is. But yeah, so as I mentioned, it was an extremely involved research project. Like I said, it took 4 years. The entire time we spent researching, and towards the end, we're also writing, of course. But our strategy as researchers is essentially like, there are a lot of books about space settlement, and often they either rely on expert interviews or kind of a pop understanding of a topic. And our policy is always try to read primary literature. We do talk to experts, but only after we have a grounding in the field. Very dangerous to talk to experts when you don't have a beat. You know what I mean? Without naming names, there are definitely cases where if we had only talked to an expert, we'd come away with actually untrue information, because often the field has changed, and the emeritus professors have not gotten up to date on it, or sometimes the field is just kind of data poor and people make stuff up and it gets relied on. We have examples of this in the book, and so as again for me. We wanted to do a chapter which was very difficult to research on the international law of how states come into existence in the modern world, which has changed ever. And there's a book on that. There's a classic book on it by Crawford. It's like 1,400 pages long, and it's the most boring thing that anyone has ever written. And we read it page by page. And because the alternative was to call someone up and get the gist of it. So when you say it's very detailed, that's essentially why is when we talk about Martian resources, it's because we got the textbook and preceding documents going into it. We did talk to experts, but mostly to check us, make sure we weren't telling any whoppers, and they did catch a few, which is very valuable. But so down to process, and this will get into working with my wife on a research project. So the first thing is, unfortunately, no drama. There's actually, no, I take that back. There's real drama about whether to use Microsoft Word or Google Docs. That was close to a fist fight.
Which one?
Yeah. No, we worked reasonably well together on our last one we did together called Soonish. I would say required about 1/20th as much research. It was a much easier project, much less ambitious. Still good. Available at fine bookstores everywhere, but much easier. And so for that book, we just kind of, you take this chapter, I'll take this chapter, and then at the end, we'll kind of polish together. For this book, the load of work is so enormous, we had to do division of labor. In econ, it's like division of labor is part efficient, and the more complex society gets, the more you have to do it. And so it was at some point, we actually divided up the tasks by talent and inclination. And so the actual process by the end, fairly streamlined, was we both read, but we read in different ways. So I read much more quickly than Kelly, but she reads with much more fidelity. So meaning a lot of my job was there are something like 80 to 100 astronaut memoirs, personal testimonies of having been at space, and I was just grinding through them. I was buying any I could. Some of them are self-published. Some of them came out in 1982 in the Soviet Union. I was tracking everything I could, and they're very quick read because they're just a guy talking or whatever. But they're great sources of stories nobody's heard. and stuff like tactile stuff, scent stuff. What did it smell like? What did the food taste? And so I was grinding through that at top speed. Meanwhile, Kelly was more often the one who was like, I'm going to read NASA has an 150-page technical document on the effects of space race. Very involved technical reading. She, by the way, is a research scientist by trade, so it's also good to have that. So I was sort of like scanning the horizon, and she was doing the drill down. It was extremely valuable. And so we would both take our notes from these subjects, put them in giant documents by topic. So we have literally thousands of pages of notes. She would take the relevant notes for a subject, like say space psychology, then convert it all. So space psychology, we literally had like 400 pages of notes, very diffuse topics, very hard to research. She converted that into what we called the dossier, which was something like a 30-page rundown with like an Euclid structure. And then my job as the entertainer was to then convert that to like a 3,000-word summary that was ideally entertaining and hit the high points while keeping in the research. And then at that point, it was like fighting. It was not fighting, but like we would argue with each other essentially, like go for a walk and say, are we making the strongest argument? Are we actually right here? Do we know that this thing we're saying? And then eventually, the very last step, actually, writing-wise, was the jokes. Like it's written in a humorous way. I think people think we just sat down and did that, but actually, that was like a veneer put on top. Was like, okay, well, actually, so this
punch
stuff
it up,
punch it up, get you through the technical stuff, or even I think to understand space, you have to go through like a lot of international law, which is often quite boring. So we tried very hard. We read obscure books and we would find stories. So like. We felt like we had to briefly go through Antarctic law, which is not enthralling. But we found this great story about like the time Nazis like tried to set up a country in Antarctica. And at one point it's documented that they idled a penguin. And I was like, this penguin idling is going to get us through this horrible international law. And that's why you have to research broadly, because you find these gems, that have just been lost. And then once we had that, then you go back out to experts and you say, am I totally off base? Have I misunderstood your research when I quote it? And then it goes to the editor. And then I've never had a bad editor. I'm sure they exist. I've always had, and I hope that sounds like I'm just trying to cover my ass here, but I've always looked at it very lucky. I've heard horror stories elsewhere, but I have not. And so like in our case, though, A City on Mars, I don't know, maybe people don't know this, but like when you agree to write a book, you agree to an approximate word count. So they'll say, your contract will literally say, this should be about 100,000 words. I think that's hard, but it ended up around 100 or something. Our very first draft was about 140 or 130. And you turn that and you're like, maybe she'll say it's so good. Don't take out a word. Don't worry about it. She was like, no, you can't do this. There's way too much stuff stuck in the back of this book that's not relevant to know. And so we rejiggered the entire book and we completely changed the organization in that last year. I do think it's like the reason the book is now like doing well and winning prizes and all that is because of that, fairly brutal set of notes we got and our willingness to adapt to it.
How do you're in a fortunate position to be able to get that contract before you write the book, right? I mean, did you pitch this idea? And also, let me just, before we jump into that is a direct byproduct of the following you have, right? I mean, you wouldn't have been able to get access to this. And were they critical? Did they help? Or was it just your following that assisted in getting audiences with some of these astronauts, some of these professionals, these physicists that you might otherwise look, hey, look, I do a comic. More often than not, people are not going to be picking up the phone and saying, Zach, who? Yeah, I want to tell you exactly what I'm thinking. How did you get access to that?
Yeah, so we actually had a kind of 1-2 punch on that. So we're looking at some people, so I do a lot of science jokes. So I didn't know a lot of science people to reach out to direct. But not everybody knows me. However, my wife is a professor, fellow of Rice University. And so when you say fellow of Rice University, so you and I from Texas, everybody Texas knows Rice. A lot of people outside it don't, but it's extremely highly ranked. It's like the MIT of Texas. And so if you say to a professor, my affiliation is Rice University, that opens doors. And so we actually more often led with Kelly. If people happen to recognize the name, that was a bonus, but that was actually quite useful, using those credentials. So we actually kind of used both of our networks that way, to open those doors. You're right. Yeah. Without the following a lot, I mean, we wouldn't have the book deal without, like, as you said, it's lucky not just to have like a book deal in advance before writing it. The real benefit was we were able to ask for free to do research. So if you ever wondered why like a lot of pop sci is kind of shallow and repeats like stories you're pretty sure you saw on Wikipedia or a YouTube page, that's because they have like a year to write it while doing something else. We were able to ask for 3 years for 2 people and then an extension, but we came in a little slow. Most fields don't have that luxury. That's also, by the way, often why you see an author's first pop sci offering be really good and then their second one will feel quite shallow. It's because a publisher will say, get us a new one right away. And we're just lucky, like, because we have careers that require us to make this extra project, we can say no, which is an extreme luxury. But it's also, it's kind of like one of those things where it's like an unfair advantage because, you know, as you said, a lot of what we've been successful is the depth of research, which I don't think we'll find in any other book. Maybe 1 or 2, but not many. And go ahead.
I was just going to say, certainly not as comprehensive, and
Right.
it's for science nonfiction, it is as informative as it is funny, which you might be the standalone in that category.
I would Mary Roach is easily as good as we are, and Bill Bryson is, but I do think I would say we did our best, and there's a few jokes I'm very proud of. Let's say.
What's it like punching it up with the jokes? I mean, because that's not an easy thing. People think it's easy to be funny, and you know, it's harder to make people laugh than it is to make them cry.
You know, yeah, oh, absolutely. But I would say, you know, it's funny. I think I mentioned earlier we had a certain division of labor, my wife and I. So for me, this is like my part is that I really enjoy editing. Like if you gave me you know, a 10,000 word thing and said, make this better, I could sit around doing that for 6 hours and it copy and enjoy it myself. My wife is very like, when she writes a scientific paper, she wants to build it brick by brick. Like, I've completed the first sentence, I'm moving on to the second sentence, and there's no need to change anything. I'm very like, I want to, she at some point would take a chapter out of my hand. She's like, the chapter is done. You're not allowed to completely change it again. And I think when you know, this gets down to, by the way, I mean, we did have a kind of, you know, we had a very good relationship. I think, you know, it helps that you're married and with kids. It's you're fairly stuck. You have to resolve your problems. But like, you know, it's nice. It was actually one of the really cool things about our partnership on this book was like, you know, we were both very much like, look, this book, we want it to be the best it's going to be. And so sometimes what would happen is we'd say like, the next job of the book is a Kelly job, which by which I mean it's going for each sentence and verifying that the source material is an accurate representation and then putting it in citation. That's a Kelly job. She's the research scientist. And so often that would be like, Zach, your job is to watch the kids only. I mean, they go to school or whatever, but like all kid duties now fall upon you, like Kelly, you're into an office. And I feel like it's the kind of thing where if it was just her book and not mine, it would be easy to be like, well, this isn't very fair. But it was both of ours. So I'm like, all I got to do is watch kids at the playground. You're doing the hard work. And we had that, you know, later she had to watch the kids and I was like doing the final humor pass or whatever. And so we were able to keep this very supportive relationship. And most crucially, I think, now and then there would be something where one of us would write something and the other would be like, sorry, this kind of sucks. And nobody wants to hear that. But because we're very oriented around the final product, it was kind of easy to swallow or relatively, or at least it had to be swallowed. Let's say it that way.
It seems like, I mean, I think all partnerships are better served when there's a higher purpose.
Yes.
And in the form of marriage, it's oftentimes children, but certainly when working on a product like a book, that becomes the priority, right? So you get to serve that. So I'm wondering, and this is a tall order, so you can throw it out if this question, but what takeaways do you think, and I'll preface this by saying the idea of space travel, while I don't want to be the beta test, is exciting. And I thought, wow, we seem to be getting closer. After getting through the parts of the book that I haven't finished it yet. I no longer think that.
I know.
By any stretch of the imagination. In fact, I wonder if my son, who's 2, will see it himself. But what takeaways do you think? What do people who are super excited about this and think it's very near term, what do you think they miss, and what do you think that they should be considering as they contemplate the potential quote unquote benefits of this opportunity?
I would say the big, you know, obviously this is a whole book, but the big picture stuff is like, it's definitely harder than advertised. So just, you know, there's this idea afoot that the rockets are getting big now, and that's true. And a lot of that's down to SpaceX and Elon Musk. But that leaves open a lot of other problems that are seldom discussed, and we have just very limited data on all sorts of biological factors, most notably. So one, feasibility is harder than expected. Two, and I cannot overstate this, there is nothing of value in space other than data transmission, right? And it'll probably stay that way for a very long time. So talking about space-based solar, space-based manufacturing, asteroid mining, most crazily of all, moon mining. The moon has nothing worth getting, even if it's gold sitting on the surface. It's so expensive and will remain so. There's probably have listeners yelling at me about how I'm wrong. They've read some articles. Please read the book. It's pie in the sky. Companies start this, they get VC money, they go bankrupt, as night follows day. So the financial emphasis is not there. It's not like, people will say, well, it'll be like aviation or computing, and you're like, aviation computing had clear immediate benefit. Satellites work this way. Satellites have developed a lot because data transmission and remote sensing are extremely valuable. Navigation. So low feasibility, no kind of ratchet for the space settlement stuff. And then there's an argument that some of it's not even desirable to could do it, especially in the short term. There's risk to the home planet of putting, as has been proposed, million-ton objects in low Earth orbit. I hope for obvious reasons that's quite dangerous. So I would say, if you ask me what people have missed, I think, unfortunately, a lot of the reporting on this and the books on this are pretty shallow, and they're mostly written by advocates for doing it. They're often written by people who are running VCs or trying to hire young, talented engineers. I don't mean they're like grifters or liars, but it's like, when your ability to run your company depends on convincing people of something you tend to believe in. And lastly, I guess I would say, Kelly and I are just kind of like jerks. So we just when you have a nice uplifting statement, we're like, want to see if there's evidence for it. And often, unfortunately, stuff that people really deeply believe, there's not good evidence. And let me end by saying, someone who disagreed with me deeply and was being completely rational, I think what they would say is, Zach, you don't appreciate that humans have a lot of ingenuity, and we're going to work this out faster than expected, as you naysayers always say we will not. And when we get to Mars, we're going to be able to start countries. There's going to be entrepreneurialism. There's going to be there's a lot of bureaucracy on Earth. A lot of people like you saying that we should not do all this awesome stuff, and we're going to do it. And you're going to be left in the dustbin of history. And I think they would believe something like that. And all I would say is, I don't even necessarily agree. I just think the time scale is, I don't think it's going to be at 20 years.
Well, what you learned about international law,
yes.
Do you have any insight? And this is a little bit off topic, but I think it's related. is sort of satellite pollution, because we're starting to encounter some of that now as it relates to just the satellite orbiting our planet. I mean, I think those have increased thousands of % in the last handful of years.
Yeah. So I haven't looked at the numbers lately. So if I'm wildly off base, someone can correct me. But I think Starlink alone, which is SpaceX's internet service provider, has something on the order of 5,000 satellites. For context, before they started launching, I think something 9,000 satellites had ever been, going back to Sputnik in 1997. The environment has deeply changed. When you refer to pollution of orbits, there's really two senses in which that's used. One is light pollution, meaning if you're doing certain types of astronomy, like you imagine you're doing a long exposure of a star, but now there's way more satellites going up. If you look at all the planned satellites, it's going to go from something like 10,000 objects now to maybe 50,000 objects. That's going to get in the way, certainly, of visual and visible spectrum astronomy. I have nuanced feelings on that. I sympathize with the astronomy community being pissed about it. I think there's a debate over how bad it is. On the other hand, the flip side is you imagine a world where in 10 years, everybody in Africa can get high-speed internet. If you're into developmental economics, that's pretty damn good. It's hard to say humanity would be better served by better, telescope data than by, allowing a fisherman in a poor African village to get market data. So I have sort of complex feelings about this. I don't think anybody would be too happy with me. The other concern is that if you put so much junk in space, eventually there's going to be an increase in collisions, and a bunch of stuff is going to get destroyed. And there's even an idea called the Kessler syndrome, which means space gets so ruined with objects that we can't even launch anymore. I think that's a legit concern, but usually overstated. So people are maybe familiar with the tragedy of the commons, which, commons meaning in this case, like a pasture where you put animals. and there's a situation in which a particular person grazing their herd gets more money out than the destruction they're doing to the grazing. So there's always always an incentive to keep grazing until the thing is destroyed because it wasn't priced properly to the people using it. In space, you don't have a tragedy of the commons. You have a commons. Space is a commons, but it's not a tragedy of the commons because everyone has skin in the game. Okay, if Elon Musk causes out of control cascading destruction of satellites, he's going to lose like hundreds of billions of dollars. Same with like space agencies that have these satellites up. Like if the U.S. suddenly loses its GPS system, that's disastrous, right? So everyone's really priced in. You can imagine a maniac detonating nuclear weapons in space, and that's a real threat. But I think it can be overstated by analogizing it to like landfills on Earth. So like everything in our book, it's nuanced and weird and complicated.
Well, it also becomes a subject of international vulnerability, right? I mean,
Yes.
This becomes international warfare subject.
It is, but it's very mutually assured destruction. So one thing,
Sure.
So it's like it's very easy to destroy a satellite if you're an advanced nation. Every big player today, India, Russia, the U.S., China, everyone has demonstrated what's called ASAT capability, like that is just say to knock out a satellite. They've only done it on their own satellite as a sort of saber rattling. Look what we can do. But normal satellites, if you field a satellite, it's not like it's armor plated, right? Like why would it be? And so if, like I said, if some maniac wants to knock out a lot of Earth satellites, they can. But I think the big thing to realize is space is just not like Earth. You can't target, right? So if you blow up a nuclear weapon in some orbit, radiation and bits of stuff go everywhere in that orbit at high speed. So anything that is in that shell is in danger. That might include your stuff. Right. And then if it flings other stuff into other shells, it's a disaster. So it has to be someone who's really trying to end the world or doing something very bad anyway. It's not a good place strategy.
I'm going to switch gears and start to bring this in for a landing. I'm going to ask you a dad question. So
Yes.
Just because I know you and Marty, you two are extraordinarily achieved men, very accomplished, incredibly bright, very interested, and I think resultingly very interesting people. What was it in the water? Was that nature or nurture? And how do you replicate that within your own children?
Oh gosh, that's a tough one. So
clearly you allude to discipline, right? I mean, scheduling your days, I think, is a pretty critical component to moving the ball forward.
Yes, although I don't think my parents taught me. I have great parents, so best parents in the world, but discipline. So they were very, you do what you care about and we'll support you. That was essentially my parents' attitude. And they push the kind of stuff parents do, like do your damn homework, maybe learn an instrument. But I think they were unusually unpushy. I think there was a sense that you ought to be ambitious, but not you ought to be a doctor, an engineer, or whatever. And as a result, I mean, there are six of us, six siblings, and everybody's doing something very different. And I think that was probably part of it. But I don't know. I'm always scared with this stuff because as you know, as a parent, like every kid is different. You don't have a lot of choice over what. So like, I do have a sort of, everybody's got a philosophy of parenting, but I think you ought to never get credit or blame within reason. Like if maybe if you're like a monstrous parent, you should get blamed. But like, I really feel that having a kid is kind of like having a roommate you have a lot of responsibility over. Like this is someone you're meeting, not creating. Because there's science on this. Like people can be angry at me about this, but look, a lot of personality is baked in the moment the baby comes out, either from genetics or from conditions in utero. It just is. And so you can look this up. There's a way scientists say this, which is heritability increases over time, which means if you look at what's called a GWAS, an estimated genetic score of something like IQ, it's moderately correlated when they're in your household. It's going to get closer to what you would expect when they get older, which means they're going to become sort of more like themselves. I'm going to go on a whole thing, but I don't stop. So, but if you
I find this super fascinating for the record. So you've got a little bit of runway here.
So essentially, if you accept that, then your goal is to kind of just, be there for the kid and make sure you're not messing them up. Like if you really want a profound effect on your kid, you can like start them. But otherwise, a lot of it's baked in. And so, to my mind, you should worry a little less than you probably do. But so, two things for me. So like with my daughter who's 10 now, she's very mathematically gifted in a way I was not. And so I can nudge her along. But a big part of that for me is developing a sense of self-worth. So like, I say, as you gathered, I'm like a kind of data nerd. So there's reasonably good data. Parents obsess over, well, I don't want to make them do X because they'll stop loving it intrinsic. They'll stop loving it. The pretty good data that gets called intrinsic motivation is actually loading on pure esteem and a sense of excellence in oneself. Meaning, if you're really good at basketball and a pretty girl says, gosh, you're good at basketball, you start doing more basketball. And you might say, I'm intrinsically motivated by basketball. But we're all social apes. We're all motivated by what people around us are doing. So I wanted for my daughter, and so far this seems to be working. We'll see. Check in with me 6 months from now. To have a sense of herself as someone who's smart. There's reasonably good data that girls around age 13 decide smart is anti-feminine. Like boys won't like me if I'm too smart. And so I wanted to sort of get ahead of that and just say, sorry, you're smart and you know it, too bad. But that's about all I do. I push a little on stuff that I think will sort of create her sense of self. And other than that, I sure with my little guy who's 8. So my other kid is special needs. He's autistic. He's nonverbal. He'll probably need care his whole life. And so part of why I'm very comfortable saying parents don't deserve credit or blame is I have someone in this case where it's very clear that like he came a certain way. And that like my job is to just do my best for him. And I don't get to brag later about either of my kids. And I don't get to take credit if they do poorly. And that's been very liberating to feel that way. I think the data does back me up, but I also think it's like a good way to live. It's a good way to like not yell at your kid because they're not doing violin or whatever, because it really doesn't have a lot of bearing on long-term outcomes, especially if you're like talking like set aside whether you want them to go to Oxford or whatever, talking about whether at 30 they're healthy, wealthy, and happy, the things all parents hopefully care about. A lot of it doesn't matter. That.
But I think, at some point, emulation plays a role, right? I mean, seeing you and Kelly behave in a certain way informs how they might consider practical applications within their day-to-day life.
I hope at least, a kid, kid can see, like, I like that you could have a weird life. You could do like, so both Kelly and I are doing kind of offbeat career paths. But to be honest, I'm even skeptical of that. I'm so deeply skeptical that parents matter as much as we think we do. I think it's such a, like, it's already stressful enough to be a parent, but I think parents think everything they do for a kid is kind of a metaphor for what they'll be like when they're 25. And that's just so, it's just, I say that's way, like, there's a certain sense in which, according to some of these theories, my mom did everything wrong. She really shielded us in a way a lot like and she's very open about this. She's like, I didn't want you guys to learn anything bad ever happened anywhere. And you would think that would mean we all lived in shells in our adult lives. We don't. We all go through stuff. And I think just part of what's going on is it just doesn't matter that you can't make your kids be what you want. I mean, you can browbeat them into, mercilessly. I think we all know some kid who was forced to be an engineer and is like kind of miserable in middle age. But like, within reason, you just don't have a lot of control, and it's very freeing to accept that.
Well, look, I really appreciate you being on. This was awesome. I'd love to have you back. You care to tease the audience and what you've got coming up next? Sure.
I'm in a weird career point where I have opportunities, which is a very bad thing to have. So I can't say too much, but so I read a kid's book that was like weirdly popular called Beowulf. It's based on Beowulf. The like mafia librarians really pushed it, and it's done quite well. So I'm working on a sequel, which has just been absolutely brutal. This is so we did talk about, which is writing poetry, which is my other universe now. And then I'm working on a more series like kids comedy book, but which I can't say too much about. But that has been that's the brutal thing I was editing this morning that's just absolutely killing me. But so I guess expect like a book a year for a very long time. And then more distantly, I'm working on a graphic novel project with computer science that will come out someday. So we'll see.
That's super exciting. We'll be sure to include those in the show notes. And if people want to get a hold of you, follow you, what's the best way to track that?
That's hard to know these days, but I guess just go to SMBC-comics.com, and I'm on the usual social media. And I'm the only person other than my wife named Weinersmith who let my kid. So I'm fairly easy to locate.
Perfect. Any closing thoughts?
Oh God. No, I'm out of thoughts. I've used them all up.
Thank you, Zach. It was awesome seeing you. Appreciate you
Thanks.
being
Yeah.
on.
Nice seeing you too.